Endeavor, Horizons of the Infinite, Episode 2. Endeavor to do the right thing. By Elton Garr. Regan moved to the largest window on the cargo ship as it approached the shipyard. She would spend at least the next year on the Endeavor, but it was unlikely she would see it from the outside often. There were more senior pilots to fly the shuttles and few other reasons for a pilot to leave the ship. She saw 3 ships that looked like the Endeavor, but those were in early stages of construction. The Endeavor's sister ships. But that didn't explain why the Endeavor wasn't here. The rest of the crew wouldn't even be here for days. She rushed towards the passenger's airlock. There were a handful of other people here. Most of them officers on the Endeavor. The ship's chief of flight operations stood near the airlock, several feet in front of everyone else. She considered approaching him since he was in her direct line of command, but when she had tried, he was yelling at one of the crew of the cargo ship, so she decided it could wait. The other was a woman with black hair and round glasses. She was one of the shortest women that Regan had ever seen, and her smooth features and round glasses made her look almost doll-like. She was the official Commonwealth representative for the Endeavor. A job that, so far as Regan knew, didn't actually exist. Though it was possible the crew manifest had been updated. She approached Alonzo. He glanced at her and smiled, then said,
"I can't wait to get onto the ship. The specs say it has a Mark 7 variable phase magnetohydrodynamic bypass assembly. The last ship I worked on only had a Mark 4.
Regan had made the mistake of talking about engines with Alonzo, and hadn't been willing to admit she didn't understand anything he said over the next week. Was the pilot supposed to know what a bypass assembly did? She nodded and then said,
"You might have to. Is there any reason that the Endeavor wouldn't be in space dock?"
They wouldn't even be done with the diagnostics yet. If the full crew was here, they might test the conventional engines, but not with drones and an untested AI.
Alonzo said. Behind them, a tall, thin man in his 60s said,
"I couldn't help but overhear rumors that a corporate executive got himself in some trouble. The captain took the ship to rescue him."
The man wore a black suit with a brimmed hat and glasses. He had introduced himself as the Endeavor's chaplain, but while they had talked, Regan had spoken mostly about herself.
"With no crew?"
The drones do most of the day-to-day work, and the chief engineer was there since he was helping to build the ships. And the first officer,
Edric Ulster said.
"Perhaps they'll let me help with the other ships. I'd love to see the insides of them before they're all closed up."
Alonzo said.
"But they need the crew,"
Regan said.
"There isn't much that can be done about it,"
Edric said as the airlock began to open.
"There has to be a ship here somewhere we can use,"
Regan said, as they began to walk into the shipyard and back into what felt like the Commonwealth. She had known Astron Dynamics was using this as a forward base, but she had still assumed it would be like everywhere on the frontier, which meant resource-poor, undermanned, and using out-of-date technology. Of those, only undermanned might be accurate, but that was because Astron had partnered with Parallax Innovations, who was beginning the process of strip mining the small dead world that the shipyard was orbiting and turning the materials into robots. Most of them would still be on the planet expanding the strip mining process, but for every human she saw at least 3 robots. Alonzo walked up to the first of those robots, a machine about 7 feet tall with arms that were too long, who was carrying a piece of machinery that Regan probably couldn't have budged if it was sitting on the ground. He said,
"Are you a Parallax HM3600 hauler drone?"
The robot seemed to sag and said,
"I am a Series 3400, but I am due to be upgraded to the new operation system in 3 months.
"Why would you want to do that? The 3400 is an optimized system. They added considerable bloat to the new updates. And the major difference between the 3400 and the 3600 is the battery. I can see advantages in the extra 4 hours for efficiency, but only if you want to work 4 extra hours every day,"
Alonso said, seeming to have forgotten everything else. It also reminded Regan how much she didn't deserve to be on the Endeavour. Alonso was only a couple of years older than she was, but he was brilliant. How could one person know everything about the ships and the robots that built them? She knew part of the answer to that question. If she didn't stop him, Alonso would spend the next hour chatting with the robot about engineering. So she interrupted the conversation.
We were hoping there might be a ship we could use to catch up with the Endeavour,"
Regan said. The robot tilted its head, presumably, to search the station's database, then said,
There are 3 abandoned scout ships. Perhaps you would be allowed to take one of those.
"They're abandoned because they're garbage. Those use the M99 3B flow stabilizer, which were replaced because they have a flawed thermal exhaust."
"Will it get us to the Endeavour?"
"No. I mean yes. Probably, but the Endeavour is faster than anything else in the frontier,"
Alonso said. Regan was surprised when Edric said,
Presumably, wherever they go, they will stop for a time then return for the crew. If we follow the correct path, we meet them partway.
Regan said.
I do not find the same excitement in a shipyard as an engineer. I volunteered to come out here to see the frontier. Getting to fly in a genuine scout ship seems like an adventure.
She almost told the chaplain that it was going to be too crowded. The scout ships were designed for teams of 2. And barely that. So she just started in the direction that the robot suggested. If the others didn't want to come, then they wouldn't. The person running the shipyard pointed them towards the 3 abandoned ships and told them to do what they wanted with them. So far as she was concerned, they weren't worth scrapping. They picked the one with a half-full cargo hold. She was already in the pilot's seat by the time Alonso and Edric got on. And as soon as the door began to shut, she took the controls.
Do you know where you are going?
Edric asked as he glanced around the main room of the ship. It wasn't much bigger than a shuttle, but those were only used to transfer people from the ship to the surface, not to spend weeks on in space. She tapped on the monitor so it flickered on and said,
"The Endeavour would have a flight plan."
The screen continued to flicker as she tried to type in the request. They weren't entirely wrong. There was no reason for the flight plan to be restricted, but having to come back immediately to get it would just waste time.
"What is the rush?"
Alonso asked, but while he talked he took out a small tool and began to poke at the screen. Then a moment later it came on steadily.
"I was on Captain Watt's last ship. He requested me personally."
That doesn't make you indispensable, and if he couldn't do this mission without us, he'd still be here.
The chaplain said.
"You don't know the captain the way I do. If he thought it was safer, he'd order us off the ship even if it meant a ship needs a pilot,"
Regan said, and the data on the Endeavour's flight plan began to appear. She didn't bother to figure out where they were going before she primed the engine. A ship like this would take a day to reach its maximum cruising speed, and even if they spent that entire day going the wrong direction, they'd still get to their destination faster than waiting. She almost immediately saw the reason Alonso and so many others called the Astron Dynamics Explorer B208 a piece of mass-produced junk. The controls were sluggish, and that was coming from someone who had spent most of her career flying a cargo ship. So sluggish, she had to readjust it twice to get the ship on the optimal flight path. What made that worse was that the ship's gravity and dampeners didn't fully compensate, so every time she turned it the ship jerked, making her look incompetent. By the time she got the ship going the right way, Edric had returned from the cargo hold with a box of food. Regan had been forced to eat similar rations before. It had everything you needed to survive, if you didn't include taste or texture in that. Still, she was getting hungry, and she appreciated that the chaplain, who was older than both of them put together, didn't have a problem doing the menial tasks. And while it took a lot of spices, it tasted mostly like food. After that, she double-checked the ship's navigation. If it hadn't drifted by almost 3%, she might have missed the distress call. She began to adjust their course, as Alonso pulled his head out from under the console and said,
"If you can find me our T3 modulator, I can get rid of that drift. But right now I'm adjusting the fuel mix. I think I can get us an extra 4% speed. It will be rough on the engine, but we won't be using her long."
It's not that. It's a distress signal. I'm adjusting course.
That could be a bad idea,
Edric said.
I know we can't do much, but we can try, and if we can't help, we can send someone who can,
Regan said.
Have you ever been to the frontier before?
Edric asked.
The ardent cargo took things to the frontier,
Regan said, not really clear on why that mattered.
A corporate cargo ship with, let's say, 5 combat fighters escorting it.
Edric said.
8.
I lived in a frontier town for 3 years. The odds are better than even that the signal is from pirates.
The idea someone might abuse a distress signal like that had never occurred to her.
I can contact them first.
And they'll know exactly where we're at,
Alonso said, having climbed out from where he was working on the ship.
We can't just ignore it. We're out here to help people,
Regan said. This time Edric just laughed. Then he smiled a bit of a sad smile and said,
That is noble. And from what I've read of him, and from what I have learned by spending time with the one person he requested, I believe the captain will find ways to do good out here. But that's not the mission. We're here to help the corporations control the frontier. That may involve earning some goodwill, but only if they think that's profitable.
It's why I'm out here. And technically, I'm the captain of this ship,
Regan said. She was, technically, the ship's owner, since she was the one the shipmaster had given it to. She was also giving commands to 2 people who would outrank her on the Endeavor, even if they weren't in her chain of command.
Then, in my position as advisor to the captain, I'd like to recommend caution.
I'm not willing to abandon people.
These ships use solar collectors to boost their signals. We could use them to make contact,
Edric said.
I'll rig them up,
Alonso said. The plan was simple. If they disabled the transponder, the tiny ship would be all but invisible, unless you were practically on top of it. So they'd launch the solar collectors, then fly away and wait to see if someone showed up to attack them. But they couldn't just stop the ship. It would make escape almost impossible. And if they were moving, that opened up an entirely different problem. They needed the engine to turn the ship, otherwise they'd fly out of range of the solar collectors in about a minute. But that was her problem, not theirs. So, as they worked, she began to examine the controls of the ship. She had largely gotten used to the sluggish controls. You didn't need to turn a ship like this quickly. But there wasn't any other way to control it. At least, until she began to examine the secondary systems. She might have missed it if the ship had more systems. Luckily, it was a tin can with an engine and basic life support. But you didn't take a ship out like this without a gravity shield, even if that shield was only strong enough to deflect micrometeors. As she began to test using gravity to steer the ship, it creaked under the gravitational shear. Alonso sprung to his feet, hitting his head on the table as he came up and began to scan the ship. Then said,
What was that?
We can't use the engine to steer while we're hiding, so I'm using the gravity shields,
Regan said, trying to sound confident.
I don't know what you do with corporation ships, but this wasn't built for that. The gravitational shearing is going to cause micro-fractures in the metal as soon as you use it.
Then what do you suggest?
Not answering the damn signal,
Alonso said, and he began to clench and relax his fingers as he scanned the room, seeming to look for a way to escape.
We can't just abandon people, but I'll be careful. I can use the engines for the first few seconds, But if we want to stay hidden, they need to be off before anyone can arrive,
Regan said.
Just do your best not to rip the ship into pieces. Crack one of the windows and we're dead in minutes.
Launching the solar collectors at full speed wasn't all that big of a deal. Basic conservation of momentum was at play, so the solar collectors stayed with their ship as Elric contacted the ship sending the distress signal. With her focused on piloting both the ship and the solar collectors, and Alonso pulling on the only spacesuit on the ship, Edric tapped into the communications to open the signal to the probes.
This is Spirit Keeper Ulster. We got your distress signal. What is the nature of the emergency? We are a small ship, so may need to get help.
As he spoke, Regan flipped the thrusters on the solar collectors so that they began to move away from the scout ship. The thrusters on those weren't strong, but it should be more than far enough away to be difficult to see the ship by the time anyone could get here.
We're having some trouble here. Nothing a small ship couldn't handle. I'm sending you our coordinates,
The voice on the other side said.
We'll need details. We have an engineer and a few parts.
Edric said.
right? Hold for a moment. I'll get the captain.
The voice said. Edric took his hand off the transmission button and said,
It doesn't sound urgent. We can afford to get the Endeavour.
That was reasonable. If their life support was failing, they would have said that. It seemed far more likely they had a navigation system failure. They'd need help, but nothing urgent. While they waited for the response on the radio, Regan began to use the gravity shields to turn the ship. If she started now, she'd be able to put less strain on the ship than trying to turn faster later. But there was some small creaking. She trusted the ship. Alonso was less certain. But he was the one in the spacesuit, so if they sprung a leak, he'd have a safe if uncomfortable trip back to the shipyard. Then there was the telltale flash of an FTL drive. Then, another. 4 ships appeared, each about 5 times the size of the scout ship they were in. Their transponders said they were transport ships.
Well, we know now. Those are pirates,
Edric said, flipping off the radio. It was useless, unless they wanted the pirates to know where they were at. Regan bumped up the gravity shields to full, and the ship began to shudder, but she needed to keep the ship turning.
What are you doing? Just fly out of here.
Alonso said, beginning to move towards the controls.
It's not that simple. Their FTL will be faster than ours. We need to get to FTL without being seen.
So fly away as fast as possible. The engines take 4 seconds to charge, so if we're 5 light seconds away we'll be gone before they see us, and that makes it all but impossible to know which way we went.
Alonso said, and he began to reach for the controls.
Not if we're going in a straight line, away from those solar collectors,
Regan said, but she could feel the stress on the ship now. She pulled back on the gravity, allowing it to turn slower, but before the stress receded, Alonso hit the controls. Not the gravity shields which would have stopped them turning, but the speed controls. The reverse thrusters began to slow them. It wouldn't be fast, but the thrusters could alert the pirates. That was why she wasn't using them. And the lost speed would make them slower once they entered FTL. Letting go of the gravitational controls, the angle of the gravity began to turn, and the ship began to spiral as she turned off the thrusters. At the same time, Edric grabbed Alonso. The much older man wouldn't be able to physically force Alonso away from the controls, but even in his panic, he wasn't willing to fight the chaplain. Meanwhile, Regan watched the pirate ships to see if there was any sign that they had seen the thrusters. Time went agonizingly slow. But she waited because despite the panics, Alonso had the engineering right. They needed to be 5 seconds out. She gave them 7. At 0.1 light speed, that took over a full minute, her stomach in her throat the entire time, as she imagined the pirates desperately trying to find them. Then, once she felt safe, she hit the FTL. The half a second of reverse thrusters wasn't much, but once in FTL, she felt it more than she cared to admit. They still had days to go, and that loss in speed would slow them down at least 4 hours. But they were able to catch the Endeavour as it was returning to the shipyard. There had been near silence on the ship since they escaped the pirates. Alonso seemed embarrassed by panicking, and Regan didn't feel any need to console someone who almost got them killed. That left Edric to keep up the conversation. But that uncomfortable silence turned into an entirely different type of silence when they dropped out of FTL to rendezvous with the Endeavour. The ship hung majestically in space as the two ships matched speed, only the long trails of fire from the Endeavour's engine speaking to its true speed. It was twice the size of the cargo ship that Regan had piloted before, and this one wasn't 95% cargo holds. Then, as Regan began to move towards the shuttle bay, Alonso began to talk excitedly about the engine specs and turning ratios. That part she understood, though she would understand it better once she got to fly it. The captain and the engineer met them in the shuttle bay. Regan tried not to smile too broadly as she stepped out into the Endeavour. She wasn't a tourist, this was her ship. Alonso glanced around, then seeing the chief engineer, walked over to him and asked,
Are those shuttles running dual-cycle fusion drives? That's absurd. I mean, in the most beautiful way. You could do a periapsis run skimming the ergosphere of a rotating black hole and probably survive.
Regan almost started that way. She was the one who flew the shuttles, and so she mostly understood what he said, but before she did, she saw the captain. Adrian Watt was grinning as he approached, and he gave her a hug, then seeming to realize other people were in the room. He stepped back and put out his hand to shake hers. As she took it, he said,
You have no idea how good it is to see you.
Glad to hear a pilot will be useful. I'll get up to the bridge and take my position.
No need to hurry on that. We changed the rendezvous point. The ship with the crew will be here in about an hour,
the captain said. Regan glanced back at the shuttle, and as she did, a window cracked. An hour. A week crammed into that tin can with 2 other people, nearly killed by pirates, and she got here 1 hour before she would have if she had just waited. But then she realized the other pilots still weren't here. That meant she'd get an hour at the pilot's station before anyone else, and she said,
All the more reason to hurry then. I want to get a look at that station before they get here.
The captain grinned at her and said,
You really have no idea how glad I am you're here.
Author's note.
It is my goal with this series to make it a true ensemble. Of course, the captain is always going to be important in a series like this, but I think there is value, both for the audience and for me, to keep from having the same point of view characters in the first few episodes. And it's perhaps more important that point of view character not be the captain. I think Regan works perfectly because while she is one of the lowest ranked people on the ship, she's also someone who knows Captain Watts, outside of his reputation. As for how many more characters will be in this ensemble, there will be more side characters, and a couple of those introduced in passing at the beginning of this story will likely have a starring role in an episode or two. But we're mostly on to the next step of the process, which is seeing how each character interacts with the others. Because the difference between this and the Scout of the Endless Frontier is that the characters will have people to talk to who aren't their pet. Not that I don't want to get back to the story of Rust and his humans soon, and I think I can do 2 episodes a week once I get deeper into this, but for now, I'm enjoying writing about the Endeavour. Thank you. Elton Gar.